Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
Indie Alaska is an innovative weekly web series capturing the diverse and colorful lifestyle of Alaskans. Real stories of everyday Alaskans at work and play. Supported in part by Alyeska Pipeline Service Company.
The National Weather Service.
Good evening and welcome to Alaska Weather. I'm Sam Albanese from the National Weather Service, and we had some pretty impactful weather last night and earlier today. Southeast Alaska, Eldridge Rock, a location there just north of Juneau, 114 mile an hour wind gusts. Very impactful weather. Sustained winds were at 79 miles an hour. There was some down trees in the panhandle section of the state. We also had some pretty strong winds over the south central region of the state, with winds gusting 75 miles an hour up in the Palmer-Wasilla area, 96 miles an hour through Thompson Pass near Valdez. Pretty impressive weather going on around the state today. Now let's take a look at some of our weather headlines. We're expecting heavy snow for southeast Alaska. We do have a heavy winter storm warning for heavy snow in the southern panhandle, expecting between 1 and 2 feet of snow in the Petersburg-Wrangell area, with upwards of 28 inches of snow in Hyder. Well, we're also expecting dangerous wind chills up along the Arctic coast, blizzard conditions over the eastern Arctic coast, dangerous wind chills over the eastern Brooks Range, southwestern Alaska, in the Bristol Bay area, and the lower Kuskokwim Valley and the Kuskokwim Delta, expecting very low wind chills, 40, 50 below type wind chills across many of those areas. Kodiak Island, there's a possibility that we may see some blizzard conditions tomorrow there. So some pretty impactful weather going on around the state, and let's get started now and take a look at our satellite imagery. Here's the Bering Sea, the North Pacific view of the state. What's kind of noticeable here is here's your ice edge. We have this good strong northeasterly winds, cold air coming down across that Bering Sea, helping that ice to expand to the south and west. Running the loop one more time. You can see the main weather is well south of the Aleutian Islands. The jet stream is actually way down here, but the thing to note with this image is just how strong the north and northeasterly flow is off the mainland of Alaska. Now we'll take a look at the satellite, the GOES satellite over the state of Alaska itself. There's a pretty tight pressure gradient along the coastal areas of the state, and you can see the circulation, high pressure up over the Arctic regions in the northern part of Alaska, with low pressure down in the Gulf here. It's resulting in those strong outflow type winds. We'll run that loop one more time, and you can just see the flow coming off the Malaspina Glacier here out of portions of southeast Alaska. Very strong winds, especially in the channel terrain of these coastal areas of Alaska, and you can see that in your satellite imagery. Here's today's weather map. Southeast Alaska, we have this low pressure system coming up. There was some rain in the southern panhandle, a little bit of snow mixed in, but generally rain right now. As that moisture overruns the Arctic frontal boundary, as you'll see on the tonight map, we're going to see that snow coming into the picture. Snow inland in the British Columbia area. But otherwise, when you look over the state of Alaska, generally very clear conditions over the majority of the state today. But you can see these tight pressure gradients right here. Strong outflow winds through the Chugach Mountains by Valdez, and also down through the Mat-Su Valley. As I said earlier, very strong winds. Up into the northwest Arctic region of the state in the Kotzebue Sound area, blowing snow from the strong winds there, blowing snow along the Arctic coast. And as I said, blizzard conditions can be anticipated tonight over that eastern Arctic coast into tomorrow. Taking a look at tonight's forecast. Southeast Alaska, now you can see this snow is spreading into the panhandle, southern and northern panhandle. Maybe mixed with rain a little bit overnight, but the cold air is going to be in place. There should be some pretty impressive snowfall amounts as we move on through the tonight into tomorrow time frame, and that'll spread on up into the central panhandle, although up into the Juneau area, only really looking at maybe 5 to 7 inches there. Strong winds coming down through that Chilkoot White Path area. Strong winds all along the North Gulf Coast in this weather pattern. This is basically your Arctic frontal boundary pushing to the south, running along where the low is. Strong winds coming across the Alaska Peninsula, good gap outflow winds there. Blowing snow can be expected over the Yukon and Kuskokwim Delta region right up into the Bering Strait, Kotzebue Sound, and all along the Arctic coast. Some scattered snow showers as well there. Taking a look at the forecast now for Saturday. Southeast Alaska, snow heavy at times through the southern panhandle, snow spreading up into the northern panhandle. Possibility of some snow into the Haines-Skagway area, but right now not as much of a chance there. Snow spreading across the Gulf into Kodiak Island. Couple that with the winds that we're expecting there, there's a good potential that you're going to see some blizzard conditions over Kodiak Island and even in the city of Kodiak itself, which is kind of a rarity. Strong winds continuing the outflow winds throughout much of the North Gulf Coast here down into the Cook Inlet region. Probably not going to stay at the warning levels, but you're still going to have some very strong gusty winds as well as some pretty low wind chills across these areas. Up to the Arctic coast, blizzard conditions should be letting up over that eastern Arctic coast through the day Saturday, but still blowing snow conditions there can be expected. Some scattered snow showers and blowing snow over the western Arctic coast as well, and blowing snow conditions through the Seward Peninsula, Bering Strait region down to the Yukon Delta. Some snow showers as well along the north side of the Alaska Peninsula with the cold air and moisture pushing up into the mountains along the peninsula itself. Sunday, we still expect snow in southeast Alaska, spreading on up into the northern panhandle, the Chilkoot White Path area, even into the Yakutat area, potentially even as far west as the Cordova area. And with the winds that we still anticipate to be occurring across these areas, not probably going to see blizzard conditions, but some blowing snow concerns and poor visibilities and blowing snow are a distinct possibility. Down to the Kodiak Island area, snow with blowing snow is going to be persisting as well into the day Sunday. Clouds are going to spread across the Copper River Basin into the Susitna Valley and the Cook Inlet region, but expect clear conditions to persist up into the interior, southwestern Alaska. Skies are going to clear along the Arctic coastal areas, but still expect some pretty cold conditions across the majority of the mainland. Some snow showers over the Alaska Peninsula are possible, as well as the eastern Aleutian Islands in the Dutch Harbor area, and generally clear conditions, cold northeasterly winds persisting across that eastern Bering Sea in this flow pattern. Haven't really talked much about the western Aleutian Islands, but generally through the next day or two, you're just going to see some cloudy conditions out there with those northerly winds and northeasterly winds persisting through Sunday. Taking a look now at temperatures around the state today. Southeast Alaska, southern panhandle in the low 30s, single digits and teens as you move on up into the northern panhandle. It was 20 degrees at Yakutat at about 4 o'clock this afternoon. Temperatures in the 20s all along the North Gulf Coast, even into the Susitna Valley. Single digits above and below in the Copper River Basin. The thing with these temperatures is with the wind that was blowing, it felt much colder, like below zero temperatures. Up into the Tanana Valley in the eastern interior, temperatures in the minus teens to minus 20s. Moving on up to the Arctic coastal area of the state, the Brooks Range, temperatures in the minus teens and minus 20s. Same thing along the Arctic coastal areas, although Barrow was up to a 4 below, so a bit warmer than most of the other places, but it was a bit windy there, which brought your temperature up. Down into the Kotzebue Sound area in the Seward Peninsula, temperatures in the single digits above and below, 10 above in Nome, single digits along that Norton Sound area. Taking it on down to southwestern Alaska, single digits and teens from the Kuskokwim Delta into the lower Kuskokwim Valley, teens to low 20s in the Bristol Bay area, and then as we move on over towards the western Alaska Peninsula, Cold Bay up to about 39 degrees, right around freezing in the Pribilof Islands, mid-30s in the Unalaska area with temperatures out across the Aleutian Islands in the upper 30s to low 40s. Taking a look at our lows expected for tonight. In southeast Alaska, temperatures are going to basically stay right at about where they were at during the day today, right around that 30-degree mark in the southern panhandle, single digits as you move on up towards the northern panhandle. Yakutat's going to cool down to about 9 degrees. Taking a look along the North Gulf Coast, temperatures are going to be cooling overnight, although where it remains windy, the temperatures probably won't drop very much. As we move on up into the Copper River Basin in that eastern interior, minus 20s in the basin, near minus 40, in the minus 40 to minus 45 degree range in that eastern interior, to even 53 below over towards the Alcan border there. Up along the Brooks Range, in the eastern Brooks Range, minus 37 to minus 26. On the Arctic coast, in minus teens and minus 20s. Same thing as we move on over towards the Kotzebue Sound area. Norton Sound region in the minus teens over the Kuskokwim Delta and the Yukon Delta. Bristol Bay, kind of cool conditions there as well, right around 15 below for some areas. Going to cool down across that Alaska Peninsula region from 39 for the highs down to in the 20s today. In the teens in the Pribilof Islands, near 30 in the Dutch Harbor area, with temperatures in the low to mid 30s across the Aleutian Islands. Taking a look at our highs for tomorrow. Southeast Alaska, well, at least in the southern panhandle, it's going to be right around that freezing mark, and that snow is going to keep falling. As you move on over up towards the northern panhandle, temperatures basically staying right where they're at for your lows overnight tonight. They're not going to warm up much tomorrow. Temperatures right around 8 in the pass to 10 in the northern panhandle, right around 20 in the Yakutat area. Teens along the North Gulf Coast, minus teens in the Copper River Basin, excuse me, to minus teens and minus 20s across the eastern interior, and minus teens as you move on across the western interior. Along the Arctic coast, minus teens to right around 8 below is what you can expect for tomorrow. Southwestern Alaska, temperatures generally in the single digits above and below zero. And then over to the Alaska Peninsula, expect your highs to actually stay on the cool side, only in the mid-20s there, teens for the Pribilof Islands, and temperatures in the mid-30s throughout the Aleutian Islands for your highs tomorrow. Taking a look at our flying weather for tomorrow. Marginal to IFR conditions is what you should expect throughout the southern panhandle and eventually spreading to the northern panhandle as well as along that North Gulf Coast. Marginal to IFR conditions along the North Gulf Coast, potentially in that western Prince William Sound area. Kodiak Island area with the likelihood of blizzard conditions, IFR conditions across significant portions of the island. Some marginal conditions across the Alaska Peninsula as well as the Aleutian Islands, and across the length of the even out to the western Aleutian Islands. Some IFR conditions, marginal conditions are possible in that Bering Strait region because of the blowing snow. Same thing over the eastern Brooks Range, right on over to the central Brooks Range and the eastern Arctic coast. Marginal conditions primarily because of the blowing snow concerns there. Taking a look at our passes for tomorrow. For Anaktuvik as well as Adigan Pass, VFR to marginal to MVFR conditions are what you should anticipate, and primarily because of the blowing snow. Taking a look down to the Alaska Range, VFR conditions for Lake Clark and Merrill Pass as well as Rainy Pass. VFR conditions for Windy Pass. VFR conditions continuing along the Alaska Range to Isabel Pass as well as Mentasta Pass. And then down to the Chugach Mountains, expect VFR conditions for Tanita Pass. Portage Pass, marginal conditions may become IFR late in the day. And then Chilkoot and White Pass, eventually becoming IFR conditions late in the day as the weather moves on in. Taking a look at our freezing levels at the surface, as you would expect over the majority, well, all of the mainland as well as the Alaska Peninsula, much of southeast Alaska at the surface, right down in that Dixon entrance area, you'll see that freezing level sloping up to about 2,000 feet. For our icing tomorrow, basically expect your icing to be in southeast Alaska, where we're expecting the precipitation overrunning that Arctic frontal boundary. Some isolated moderate rime icing from your freezing level to about 12 to 15,000 feet in the Panhandle. And then as we move on over towards the Kodiak Island area and the western Prince William Sound region, some moderate rime icing is possible from your freezing level to about 12,000 feet there. Taking a look now at the jet stream for tomorrow. The weaker portion of the jet comes up into the Arctic at 60 knots, down 50 knots as we cross the Alaska Peninsula, and 70 knots coming into southeast Alaska. The stronger jet, the main jet, 140 knots coming off south of Japan, 160 knots south of the Aleutian Islands, drops off to 80 knots south of the Gulf of Alaska, and then back up to about 110 knots near the California coast. Taking a look down to that 9,000 foot level. Generally about 25 to 40 knot winds across southeast Alaska, lighter winds along the North Gulf Coast, 45 knot winds coming out of the western portion of the state up to about 60 knots as you get up towards the Yukon Delta, 35 to 45 knot winds along the Brooks Range, and about 20 to 30 knot winds at that 9,000 foot level along the Arctic coast, 35 to 45 knot winds across the Alaska Peninsula to the eastern Aleutian Islands as well, and then out into the western Aleutian Islands, generally pretty light winds, about 35 to 40 knot winds around that high pressure system over the western Bering Sea. Taking a look down at the 9,000 foot level, about 15 knot winds across much of southeast Alaska, 20 to up to 40 knot winds as we move on along the North Gulf Coast to about 25 knots around Kodiak Island. 60 knot winds coming down along the Kilbuck Mountains and the Kuskokwim Mountains, down to the Kilbuck Auckland Mountains. About 25 to 35 knot winds across the Alaska Peninsula and 45 to 35 knot winds up through that Seward Peninsula region. And for our turbulence tomorrow, expect some moderate turbulence over the Kenai Peninsula, Kodiak Island, the Alaska Range, and the Kuskokwim and Kilbuck Mountains. Isolated moderate turbulence pretty much right on up to the Kotzebue Sound, Bering Sea coast to the Alaska Peninsula. We're out of time for this portion of the show. Enjoy the segment and come back for the marine forecast.
Good evening, I'm Harry Keeling, and on behalf of the Alaskan Aviation Safety Foundation and Alaska Public Media, welcome to Hangar Flying. This evening we welcome back our guest, Rob Stapleton. Rob's been flying most of his life. He started flying, I think, with his dad very early. He's been involved with model aircraft, fixing and flying them. He sold it at 16, and he had his license at 17. Rob came to Alaska in 1975 and started flying the usual suspects, T-Craft, J3, 150, 172, 180. He's also got involved with ultralights and the Experimental Aircraft Association. Welcome back, Rob.
Hey, Harry, thanks. My pleasure to be here.
You know, on the previous program, I think about a year ago, you talked about some of the incredible things you've been doing, like your 21 Iditarods, but what are you working on now? What's your latest project?
Well, I'm on the board of the Alaska Aviation Museum and on the board of the Airmen's Association. So I'm keeping busy with that, and then I'm also doing a lot of photography and writing stories, pretty much aviation-oriented stories.
Talk about some of, did you talk about some of the lecture series that's going on at the museum?
Yeah, the museum's got a really great lecture series. It's being sponsored by a community grant from the, I think it's the municipality of Anchorage, a centennial grant with the Humanities Forum. And every month at the museum we've had a free lecture series that starts at 6:30 and goes till about 8 o'clock at night.
Now, you told me the last one was very popular.
Very popular, women in aviation. It was very well attended. We had 72 people. It's held at the museum, so it was great. We had 3 women who talked about their experiences flying in Alaska, how they got into flying, and some of the anecdotal things that they've done.
You know, I talked to one of the people in the audience, and she said it was really well done.
Oh, it was really
enjoyed
good.
it.
Yeah, it was neat.
You got some events coming up. You want to plug those?
Yeah, we do. We've got Aviation Museum has a wine tasting on the 18th of February, but the next lecture that we're having is on the 16th, the Monday before that, and that's going to be neat because we're going to have some historic clips that we got from the Alaska Motion Picture Image Preservation Association, pictures of Will Rogers and Wiley Post when they were here in Anchorage. And then we're also, we've got another clip from AMIPA of Russell Merrill flying out of Bootleggers Cove, giving rides. And we're putting together some other things. I'm not sure exactly all of what we're going to have, but it's going to be a big surprise and it'll be neat.
So the next one's February 16th.
Yes.
6:30, did you say?
6:30 to 8 o'clock
at the museum. Okay.
That's a Monday night.
How about this fundraiser coming up?
The wine tasting fundraiser is on the 18th, just a couple of days later, and that is it's sponsored by Specialty Imports and Anchorage Wine House. So we'll have a wine tasting using all the hangars to have different stations. There'll be probably a silent auction, and there'll be some hors d'oeuvres.
On the 18th, what time?
It's 6 to 8 o'clock.
Okay, and that's again at the museum.
Yes.
Okay. So 16th and 18th, put it on your calendar. And then one final event to talk about is on March 26th.
March 26th, we've got a gala fundraiser. That's our biggest fundraiser of the year for the museum, which is a nonprofit. It's going to be held at Merrill Field, not at the museum. It's going to be at Wings of Freedom Hangar on 5th Avenue. So that's the one that used to be called hangar.net, right across from Reef Air motive.
So for folks not familiar with Merrill-Field, what's the access route there? It's right on 6th Avenue, isn't it?
I think that's in Reeve Circle.
Oh, okay, right.
So
Is there a sign on the highway side? I know
a-
there's one on the
Fifth
Flatline
Avenue,
side.
right? It's right across from one of the hamburger franchises.
Okay, and that's March 26th.
March 26th. That's going to be 5 until probably 9 o'clock at night. There will be a silent auction. There's also going to be some real interesting auction items, flight scene trips, helicopter trips. We've got one trip where we've got a corporate aircraft that's going to take someone down to Seattle to a Mariners game and then go out in the Puget Sound and cruise around. So we'll have some real interesting things. Be surprised. That's going to honor, that's for the Hall of Fame, and it's going to honor Frank Dorbrandt, George Pappas, and Orrin Hudson.
Wow. Okay, so I think hopefully our viewers have got the dates and times, and it sounds like some pretty great events.
Well, I think you can't miss, on these events.
So thanks for being on the program tonight.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Ladies and gentlemen, Rob's going to be back on next time, so we're talking about Monday, and we're going to show you some of his really fantastic pictures. He's a professional aviation photographer, and he's got some great work. So tune in, and you'll see some great pictures of airplanes and things that we all love. In the meantime, I want to remind you that the Alaskan Aviation Safety Foundation is member supported. The board of directors is unpaid. We're able to bring you programs like hangar flying, our fall and spring safety seminars, only with your help as members. So if you haven't renewed for 2015, please go on our website and renew, because we're counting on you to keep this program going. Until next time, fly safe.
And welcome back, and now let's take a look at our ice edge. Basically, coming across the Bering Sea here with that northeasterly flow and the very cold air, it is expected to continue its trek to the south and west, and may very likely make it as far out as the Pribilof Islands, which we previously had not anticipated. So taking a look at the forecast for southeast Alaska for Saturday, expecting southeast to northeast winds in those southern inside waters, pretty highly terrain-driven winds there, around 25 knots. Winds will be ramping up to about 50 knots by the evening hours up through the Lynn Canal Glacier Bay area. Along the outer coast, southeast winds 25 to 35 to 30 knots to the south, with about 35 to 40 knot easterly winds off Sitka and the Yakutat Bay area. Taking a look at the area for Sunday, winds don't change much in the southern panhandle. The winds are going to stay out of the north at 50 knots through Lynn Canal and Glacier Bay, and then southern outside waters about south-southeast winds 20 knots there. Still expecting the east gale force winds 35 knots from Sitka north to the just off the Yakutat Bay area, the east Gulf Coast there. For the south central region on Saturday, expect your winds to be out of the northeast 30 to 40 knots from Prince William Sound down into the North Gulf Coast there, increasing to 50 knots out of the northeast and north over towards the Barren Islands. Across Kodiak Island, expect your winds on the south side of the island to be around 35 knots, 45 knot northerly winds through Shelikof Strait, as well as over the Augustine Island waters, with northeast winds 45 knots in the lower Cook Inlet and north winds 30 knots in the upper Cook Inlet. So some pretty significant winds going on in that Cook Inlet region. 25 knot northeasterly winds in the Prince William Sound area, with 40 knot winds along the North Gulf Coast out of the east to northeast over to east winds at 40 knots east of the Barren Islands. Northeast winds 45 knots from the lower Cook Inlet down across the Augustine Island area, with 40 knot winds out of the north across the Shelikof Strait region. East winds 25 knots south of Kodiak Island. Taking a look at the Alaska Peninsula for Saturday, expect your winds to be out of the north-northwest about 35 to 40 knots across the entire region. On Sunday, winds are going to let up a bit. You're going to see north to northeast winds 25 knots from Bristol Bay to the north side of the Alaska Peninsula, with north winds 20 to 30 knots on the south side of the Alaska Peninsula. Taking a look at the Aleutians for Saturday, expect your winds to be out of the north-northeast over the eastern Aleutian Islands, about 30 to 35 knots. Moving over towards the central Aleutian Islands, northeast winds about 25 to 30 knots. To the Western Aleutian Islands, expected winds out of the northeast and east around 30 knots. For Sunday, we'll see the winds directions really not changing much. North to northeast winds over the eastern Aleutian Islands about 25 to 30 knots. 30-knot northeasterly winds across the central Aleutian Islands. Northeast winds 30 knots over the western Aleutian Islands and the extreme western Aleutian Islands out by Shemya. East winds 25 knots. For the Bering Sea coastal waters, expect your winds to be out of the north about 35 to 40 knots, right on up to the St. Lawrence Island region, with northeast winds 30 knots in the St. Matthew Island region. On Sunday, expect your winds to remain out of the north to northeast across the region, right around 30 knots for the entire region. For your Arctic coastal waters, outside of Kotzebue Sound, north winds 25 knots, 20-knot northerly winds off Cape Lisburne. North to northwest winds about 20 knots from Point Lay across the Barrow region, with west winds 20 to 25 knots over the eastern Arctic coastal waters. On Sunday, expect your winds to remain out of the north outside Kotzebue Sound at 25 knots. Northeast winds 15 to 20 knots over the western Arctic coastal waters. North winds 15 knots in that Barrow area, with winds out of the west 15 to 25 knots over the eastern Arctic coastal region. Taking a look at the forecast again for tonight, remember we do have a blizzard warning up along the eastern Arctic coast. We're expecting heavy snow in southeast Alaska, upwards of 2 feet in the southern panhandle, which is very likely to occur throughout the day tomorrow, and that will spread north. Windy conditions along the coastal areas across the Chugach Mountains, strong gap winds all across these regions throughout the night. Very cold conditions, blowing snow across the Yukon and Kuskokwim Delta and into the Bering Strait region. By tomorrow, snow throughout southeast Alaska. That's going to be the big thing going on. Very heavy snow, upwards of 2 feet. Possible blizzard conditions in the Kodiak Island area. Blizzard conditions up along that eastern Arctic coast. But we're out of time for the show this evening. Thank you for watching, and have a good evening.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.